are the tales from South Florida for you. With your host, Bill Monty.
We're continuing our look at the Gilded Age of South Florida. Now, previously, we spoke about the Deering brothers, Charles and James, who created Vizcaya, and the Deering Estate, well known in Dade County, as places to go and great examples of that time. Okay, I know technically this is post-Gilded Age, which actually occurred like between the 1870s and the turn of the century. Yes, most of this happened after the turn of the century. But it certainly is South Florida's own version of the Gilded Age. As I mentioned in the previous episode, were HBO to extend their very popular series, The Gilded Age, and one which I happen to enjoy very much, and bring it down to our area, the person we're talking about today would be one of the central characters. Of all the people that we're talking about in this series, I have to say my favorite is Addison Mizner. Not just because of what he created, but how he created. The man had flair and panache, let me tell you. We're talking about the wild, Gatsby-esque fantasy world of 1920s Palm Beach. Think grand villas, twisted iron balconies, hand-painted tiles, and parrots and monkeys. Yes, parrots and monkeys. Because when it comes to Addison Mizner, you don't just get architecture, you get full-blown spectacle. He basically invented the Florida fantasy lifestyle for the ultra-rich, and all with no formal training. He made Mediterranean revival a thing in America, and he did it by faking centuries of history into brand-new buildings. So today, we're unpacking Mizner's wild rise, dramatic fall, and the lasting impact he had on the look and the vibe of South Florida. Addison Mizner was born in California in 1872, but his family moved all over the place. His dad was a diplomat, so Addison spent a chunk of his childhood in places like Central America and Spain, which matters, because that's where he soaked in a love for Spanish architecture. You know, tiled roofs, courtyards, think stucco walls, the whole aesthetic. But here's the fun part. Addison Mizner never formally studied architecture. No degree, no license. He basically learned on the fly. Okay, to be honest, he did apprentice with Willis Polk in San Francisco for a bit. Willis Polk invented the San Francisco look. But mostly Mizner, he was just hustling. He tried gold mining in the Klondike. He ran an antique shop in New York. He rubbed shoulders with the rich, and he just absorbed style. The man was a vibe sponge. Fast forward to 1918. Mizner's friend, who he met in New York, was Paris Singer. Yeah, heir to the sewing machine empire. Back then, a big deal. Paris Singer invites him down to Palm Beach to design a hospital. This was at the time when World War I was going on, and Singer's idea was to design a place where these heroes of the war could come in the beauty of Palm Beach, Florida, and be healed and receive care. What happened? Mizner got right into it, and he's turning it into something amazing and fantastic. And then, wouldn't you know it, the war ends. And so does a desire to treat all of these heroes as something special. At this turn of events, fortunate for most of the world, not so much for Paris Singer at the time, he decides no more hospital, let's make it a private club for the elite. Because, of course, that's what makes sense. That club, it's the Everglades Club. It's still standing, still exclusive, and basically the birthplace of Addison Mizner's signature look, Mediterranean revival on steroids. His whole philosophy was new buildings should look old. He loved my house. So he aged materials on purpose. He imported centuries-old doors from Europe. He even had craftsmen fake cracks and wear into the stones. He was like a set designer for a fantasy movie. but he was designing for real life. And it worked. Rich families like the Vanderbilts and Phippses were lining up to have him build their winter mansions. Soon, Mizner's not just designing buildings, he's building an empire. He launches Mizner Industries to produce custom tiles, furniture, wrought iron, basically anything he needed that didn't exist yet or was now too expensive to bring in from Europe. Some highlights? Via Mizner, a little Mediterranean-style street on Worth Avenue. His own home, Villa Mizner, was part castle, part museum, and part office. And the Cloister Inn, which became the Boca Raton Resort, that project was supposed to be just the beginning of a whole city, which brings us to 1925. Mizner's on top of the world. He creates the Mizner Development Corporation to turn Boca Raton into a Mediterranean dream city. He's got investors like Paris Singer, his friend, Irving Berlin, the famous composer, even some Vanderbilts. The plan is bold: a giant hotel, a Spanish-style downtown, homes, golf courses, boulevards. And then, boom. The Florida land boom, to be precise. Everything collapses. Prices tank, there's a shipping crisis, and the 1926 hurricane hits. And Mizner? He's done. The project fails, his company goes bankrupt, and he basically loses everything, from architectural rock star to financial ruin, in just a few years. Now, we couldn't really talk about Addison Mizner and everything that he did without speaking also about the other Mizner, his brother, Wilson. Because if Addison was the architect of everything, Wilson was, well, the con man, the playwright, the boxing promoter, the hotelier, and the professional rascal. He was like a real-life character out of a Coen Brothers movie. He was born in 1876, 4 years after Addison, and he was always chasing the next scheme, leaving behind a trail of stories that are almost too wild to be true. He supposedly ran a saloon in Alaska during the Klondike Gold Rush. He managed boxers, he wrote plays for Broadway, and was briefly married to a wealthy widow, which turned into a very public scandal. And then in the 1920s, he teamed up with Addison to help run the Mizner Development Corporation, their big dream of turning Boca Raton into a Mediterranean paradise. You see, Wilson wasn't just a promoter, he was the hype man. He helped attract investors like Irving Berlin that we mentioned before and those Vanderbilts. But the whole thing was shaky from the start. Wilson once joked, "Be nice to people on the way up. You'll meet the same people on the way down." He should have listened to his own advice. After the Boca Raton bust, Wilson headed back to California and ended up working for William Randolph Hearst, managing the Brown Derby restaurant in L.A. These were two brothers, two big personalities, and one epic story of ambition, art, and collapse in the Jazz Age. Addison Mizner died in 1933, kind of forgotten and penniless. His brother Wilson died in the same year. I guess they always were doing things together. Addison Mizner, and to a lesser extent his brother, were a huge influence in everything that happened in South Florida, especially Palm Beach and Boca Raton. Addison especially was at times the heart and art of all that happened architecturally during the time of the 1910s through the 1920s. Every time you walk through a palm-lined courtyard in Palm Beach, or see a red tile roof with arched windows, or dine at a great restaurant at Mizner Park, that's Addison Mizner. He created a look that outlived the boom. That Spanish, Moorish, Renaissance mashup, it's still everywhere in South Florida. Heck, even California picked it up. He once said, "If you want to create a place that's old and beautiful, don't build it. compose it. And that's what he did. Love him or roll your eyes at the excess, you cannot deny it. Addison Mizner built a fantasy that Florida bought into and still does so. One note, much of today's tales comes from the Boca Raton Historical Society and the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, as well as the fantastic book Bubble in the Sun by Christopher Knowlton. All great resources if you want to dive deeper into Mizner's work. I hadn't heard about Addison Mizner before. I knew of Mizner Park, and I knew of roads or places like Via Mizner, but it wasn't until about a little over a year and a half ago when I read Bubble in the Sun by Christopher Knowlton that I got the whole story on Addison Mizner. And like I said, he became, of all the characters, Carl Fisher and the Deering brothers and George Merrick, it was Mizner that I thought, I could hang with that guy. He's a lot of fun. And maybe even his brother Wilson. I hope you've enjoyed another trip back to the Gilded Age of South Florida. I enjoy taking these talks down memory lane with you, and I hope that you're enjoying them too. If so, I ask a favor. Please go ahead and hit that subscribe or follow button on the platform that you listen to, if you haven't done so already. If you have, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. By subscribing or following, it ensures that you'll be notified when the next episode of Tales from South Florida becomes available. Also, remember to head on over to talesfromsouthflorida.com. That's where we have everything Tales from South Florida. We've got the audio podcast. You've got a link to our YouTube channel. We've got the Spotify playlist. If you haven't listened, go ahead and give a listen. I'm adding new songs to it all the time. We're having great fun here. Our last episode was our 50th episode, and now we're headed for the next 50. And I'm not taking that talk down memory lane alone. I invite you to come along with me every single time. I want to thank each and every one of you who have been with us, whether it's from the beginning of episode number 1 or if this is your first episode. You have a lot of choices when it comes to podcast, and I thank you so much for hitting the play button on mine. Thank you for joining us. Like Addison Mizner, we're also building South Florida history, but podcast style, and I couldn't do it without you. Until next time, my friends, please remember to be safe and be kind.
Let's take a talk down memory lane, 'cause the stories around here are just insane. Pirates World, the Sporto and Wolfies too. Palm Beach to Key West, that's where we grew. These are the tales from South Florida for you. With your host, Bill Monty.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Does the news cycle make you feel like you're on a tilt-a-whirl of outrage? Feeling like your brain is a political piñata getting whacked 24/7? There's an antidote. Outrage Overload is the podcast where we hit the pause button on the outrage train. We dissect the headlines, peel back the layers of negativity, and explore the science behind why you keep wanting to throw your phone at the wall. Before you lose another brain cell to outrage fatigue, check out the Outrage Overload podcast at outrageoverload.net or wherever you get your podcasts.